Today we are going to be revisiting the Intel Core Ultra 9 285K. This is their 8P cores, 16 E cores, flagship CPU that was pitted to be, I guess, better productivity and also better power consumption, as well as the same gaming as their previous generation i9 14900K. Now, when it came to gaming, at least when I reviewed it a few months ago, it missed the mark terribly. And when it came to productivity, it was okay, but it still fell ways behind the 9950X, at least in terms of efficiency, which led me to believe that this CPU wasn't really for anyone. It just didn't really have a whole lot going on. And even then, if you needed this CPU for, say, the quick sync functionality, you're probably better off getting, in my opinion, an i9 12900KS and just saving money and calling it a day. But let's fast forward now a few months later. We've got BIOS updates. We've also got the new Windows 11 updates to help with the scheduler issues, because when I initially reviewed it, especially for gaming, I thought that we had scheduler problems, and maybe a few updates would have fixed this. But let's get into the gaming details here. We're going to start off with 5 titles across 1080p, either high or low settings, just games that really stress the CPU out, to find out what's changed in the last few months. Now, also later on in the video, we will be checking out the motherboards. If you want to go with a Z890 motherboard, we've got a few boards that were sent in here from the board partners, which I'm going to be taking a look at all the VRM stress tests, as well as their other numbers like their M.2 heatsinks and what features they have for the price. But let's get this out of the way first. I actually feel sorry for the motherboard manufacturers this time around, because they've done a fantastic job on the feature set as well as the looks and design of the motherboards. There's actually nothing I could really fault from the motherboard side of things, but let's get back to these gaming numbers. First game we'll start off with here was Hogwarts Legacy, where we had a significant decrease in performance with the RTX 4090 that we originally tested with on Windows 10, because at the time when I did my testing across the majority of the titles, Windows 10 performed better than Windows 11, so I just decided to stick with that. And here's where, with these numbers, we've got a significant decrease in FPS, but we've also, with the new BIOS, which I tried to tune as best as I could in terms of giving this CPU the best numbers possible, I got the new BIOS giving us a slight decrease in FPS yet again. But here we've got Baldur's Gate 3, the next title up, and we've got the performance being roughly the same with Windows 11 versus Windows 10, but then we've got the new BIOS dropping down performance ever so slightly. Moving on to Far Cry 6, here is where we had a small drop in performance, but then the new BIOS actually gained a slight bit of FPS back, but overall still a worse experience than Windows 10 from when it was initially released. On to the next title here, Age of Mythology, and here is where we had a drop in FPS, as well as the new BIOS then giving us a further drop in FPS, but the 0.1% lows did increase here, so perhaps the scheduler update itself has helped with the 0.1% lows. So as for the last title, we've got Gears 5. We had a significant uplift in performance, and then the new BIOS actually dropped that down a bit over the original BIOS with Windows 11. So basically what we can see with these new BIOSes is that they are doing really nothing for your FPS. It's actually the Windows 11 update, and in particular, I think the Windows 11 scheduler update, that's giving us a significant performance increase in some games. But then, as we saw with Hogwarts Legacy, we're actually losing FPS with Windows 11 versus Windows 10. So it's really up in the air, but overall, the performance figures are not looking that great in terms of a few months later. This CPU architecture, in my opinion, is just ultimately inferior for gaming than the previous generation 14900K, for instance, and even the 12900KS. I would prefer that, which is currently going a lot cheaper than the other two CPUs I just mentioned, if you want to game on Intel, for example. So the 12900KS, me personally, when I tested it out, I had no stability problems. That was actually a CPU that was okay in my books. I've actually gone through quite a few of those in terms of flipping PCs when the price crashed on them, and I had no complaints from people who have had those rigs going, and that's actually where I derived that 5.2 gigahertz from when I apply that to stabilizing the 13900K as well as the 14900K. Now, another quick thing I'll look at here is the power consumption numbers are still roughly the same, as well as the Cinebench scores haven't really changed at all from when I first reviewed it. So in other words, the Core 9 Ultra 285K really only had some scheduler issues that caused the gaming performance to be a bit lower in some titles upon release. But when it boils down to it, the majority of people are just not going to benefit, at least from a value point, from the new Core Ultra 9. Now, the Ultra 5, I might get one of those when I go back to Japan, test it out for you guys, run some benchmarks, tell you how that performs with maybe a budget motherboard. But as it stands, it's really not that appealing of a CPU release from Intel, especially since they've officially gone to a chiplet design with this new Ultra series of lineup. So in my opinion, still quite a disappointing release from Intel here. I do believe though, however, this design just came from their business-to-business focus, and we're just basically getting the remnants of that, which is actually a sad thing for PC gaming enthusiasts nowadays, because it feels like all these companies, NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, they're all just going for that business-to-business focus and just selling to the data center market, and they just could not care about the people who helped build up their companies in the first place, and that was the single-end desktop user. So kind of feels sad, right, as a PC enthusiast to see this trend happening, and from what I've heard in the industry, it's only actually going to keep getting worse. But let's try and pick things up now, though, with a bit of positive news here in this video, and that is the Z890 motherboard roundup. And with these motherboards, I'm sorry that it took me so long to get this roundup done, and I'm including it in today's results with the 285K. And the reason for that is because I was just so unmotivated to do the video. Even though the motherboards are actually really impressive in their own feat outside of the CPU's lackluster performance. And what I mean by this is we'll actually just show you guys the numbers of the VRM temperature stress test that I did here with Cinebench R23 just continually looping, really stressing that 285K, making it push over, in some cases, over 250 watts. Right around that level, however, I think it does on pretty much all the boards but the Nova go to around 246 watts. So the wattage was very similar across the board here, so pretty equal. The Nova, however, did decide to try and boost the CPU just a little bit higher than it was on the default BIOS. Then after that, it just stuck to 5.3 gigahertz. Now, at 5.4 gigahertz all cores, I did come into stability issues with this CPU. In fact, I asked ASRock about it because they said I should be hitting around 5.5 gigahertz, but after confirming the numbers with them, I did realize that I just had probably one of the worst bins out there for a Intel Core 9 Ultra 285K, in that it could barely get to 5.4 gigahertz stable, and even then it would occasionally crash in heavy stress test benchmarks. However, back to the stress test with the VRMs here, all the boards perform phenomenally well. There's no real outlier here. The Aorus Master, that thing is just coming up the top of the charts, as well as the Taichi and the Nova, because they're essentially built with these massive VRMs. For instance, the Z890 Taichi Lite, as well as the Nova, they both share the same VRM of 25 phases and 110 amp stages. And this just makes it so that these things are designed to really power insanely high-end overclocks on these CPUs. And actually, even if you're on an LN2 setup, these VRMs would be able to handle it, same as the Aorus Master. So they're extremely overbuilt, but of course, they carry a higher price tag. And we'll show you guys the prices of all these motherboards. And for me personally, you'll notice there's a bit of a standout here. I've actually highlighted the two motherboards that I really like from this roundup in terms of being the better value choices. And that is the Z890 Pro RS, and it's the Wi-Fi version too, which you can currently get for $200. Now this features a 20-phase VRM, and it did really well on the stress test with the 285K, meaning this $200 board has all the features that I would personally need from a motherboard, and then some, and I'd be comfortable running this thing even with a Core 9 Ultra because these VRM temperatures are already really good. So if you're spending any more money than that to try get a better experience, especially with out-of-the-box settings, even with the Core 9 Ultra, you're kind of throwing your money away. The extra feature set on those higher-end motherboards, we'll talk about that in a second, but let's talk about the M.2 temperatures on all these boards. Here's where I stress tested with a T705 Gen 5x4 SSD, and I just looped this in ASSSD, and you'll see here that all the temperatures are fine except for one outlier, and that's the ITX board. Now, things are really cramped on an ITX solution, so this is actually understandable that the temperatures would be a lot higher because everything's so close together. The VRM's letting off a bit of heat, the CPU, the RAM around it, especially since I'm doing this with tuned memory, and all that heat is just collecting in an area, especially on an open testbed system where I don't really have any direct airflow over that M.2 heatsink. But it's something worth considering if you're going with an ITX solution and you're going with a Gen 5 drive in particular, and you're going to be, say, doing a lot of video editing work, or your SSD is going to be getting stressed a lot. It may be worth it to consider an active cooling solution on that Gen 5 drive just to keep it a bit cooler, and of course not have it fail like unfortunately I did. I had a Gen 4 drive fail when I tried to do my recent Ryzen upgrade on my mini ITX build, so that was very unfortunate. But when all is said and done here, the M.2 heat sinks, they've also got a lot of them quick detach features. Now I think the Nova ITX as well as the Pro RS were the only boards that didn't feature the quick release heat sinks. But when it comes to the M.2 quick release feature, if you're going to be paying extra money for that, I think the majority of users are not going to really benefit from that, because how many people are constantly changing over their M.2 drives? It's really mainly, in my opinion, just a flagship test bench feature where people who need to change over those SSDs and do so a lot will appreciate having that quick release heatsink. But for most people, I mean, spending an extra 1 minute of your time to unscrew some screws and screw them back in, it's not going to be a hassle at all. And in fact, if you can save money from that, I'd personally rather do that. So the next test to go through with all these motherboards is the onboard audio. Now here's where they all provide phenomenal results. I'm actually really impressed with all the boards in terms of their onboard audio performance. So here's where you may be wondering, what's the difference between the Z890 Nova and the Z890 Taichi Lite? And this is one difference right here, and that is, in particular, the Taichi Lite has the ESS Saber DAC on board. So you're going to get slightly better audio performance. Me personally, I just could not hear the difference when I was testing with music on all these boards. They all sounded really good. Though it's important to note here that the Pro RS in particular, that didn't have as strong as an amp drive in the stages as the rest of these motherboards. Actually, the other 5 motherboards in today's comparison, the Z890 Nova and the Nova ITX, as well as the Taichi Lite, the Aorus Master, and the Aorus Elite Wi-Fi 7, they all had extremely strong ampage on board, especially for headphones, which will power easily low to mid-range cans with ease. And in fact, if you've got a pair of high-end cans, you may even get away with, say, the Aorus Master and the Taichi Lite for having a really good experience. It's just that I don't have a high-end pair of headphones on me to test out this. But for me personally, on these boards, I could not turn the volume level over 40 without having a serious like, whoa, I got to take a step back here. This is getting really loud. So for all these results here, the worst I saw for bass roll-off under 20 hertz was like minus 1.25 decibels, which was incredible. That was the worst that I saw. Then for the numbers across the frequency response, incredibly good. So incredibly flat. Even on the Pro RS, it was impressive too. So great job on the onboard audio from both Aorus and ASRock. Let's go now onto the BIOS of all these boards. Me personally, I'm not too finicky when it comes to a BIOS. The only thing I'll critique here was probably the Pro RS, which is the white version. It also had a white BIOS. I'd like to be able to change that to a dark mode, as it's very bright on my eyes just seeing this full like light, bright background when I'm trying to change settings and concentrate. It's a little bit distracting. I'm one of those guys who likes dark mode on everything when I use Windows and stuff. So the BIOS itself, I'm only really critiquing the aesthetics. The ASRock BIOS has all the features and then some. As always, tuning your memory, tuning your CPU, not a problem. And in fact, we'll get on to tuning the memory. And here's where on all these boards, I managed to get 8600 megahertz gear 2 with the regular setting and not the 1 DPC setting. Now what this did was it allowed me to get the best gaming numbers. However, the Pro RS is an outlier here. It only managed to get up to 8466 megahertz. So all the other boards will have better capabilities with higher memory speeds, except the Pro RS will be a little bit lower, at least for the what I thought was the sweet spot for the 285K and getting the best performance. Now, when we look at the max memory OC here, this is where things get a little bit crazy, because ASRock on the ITX board claimed that there was a 9866 megahertz plus, and here's where I got close to that. I got 9733 megahertz on the speeds in Windows, which was absolutely insane. This is a crazy number in terms of speeds. I couldn't believe how high the memory was going here, but unfortunately the performance in games made it so that it was slower because the CPU was running in Gear 4 over Gear 2. So the CPU was letting back the memory, but it was good to see that the board, the ITX board, as well as the memory itself, could handle speeds this high. So the Nova ITX got the best speeds here. The other boards I could really only get, even on the case of the Taichi Lite and the Aorus Master and the Nova, I could really only get 9200 megahertz out of those boards. So the ITX is something special when it comes to getting higher memory speeds. Really impressed with what ASRock have done there. But now it's time to talk about the final features and my thoughts and opinions on all these motherboards. And here's where again, back to that price comparison, I've highlighted my two favorite picks here, but the Aorus Master has actually come a long way too. I will give this one a shout out because it does feel like a really high-end board. The audio is extremely good, as well as the BIOS. It's like Aorus have, at least with the latest BIOS update, fixed a bit of that lag that I was complaining about, and it was actually a pretty smooth experience on this board. Not to mention that they've got some enthusiast features and some overclocks there for the Core 9 Ultra. The sad thing was, as we said before, with my Core 9 Ultra was that it just was a dud of a bin. So I could not really take advantage of any of these extra features from the Aorus Master, and so that was actually unfortunate because my CPU would just keep crashing. And in fact, here's where the Nova on its original BIOS tried to, even on default settings, boost it up too high on 5.4 gigahertz, as we talked about before, and that would even crash occasionally on Cinebench. So it wasn't overall a good experience with these new CPUs. And I think tuning the BIOSes to account for, say, most people's healthy bins is probably a good thing, but in my case, I just got left behind. I feel like that kid who's the last pick on the team, and it's not a good feeling, right? when everyone else is getting these higher numbers on the Core 9 Ultra, and you're stuck with this CPU that's just a bad bin. It kind of made my experience with the Core 9 Ultra just that little bit worse than it should be. But anyhow, regardless, the Aorus Master, if you want to go down this route, it's a tank of a board. It's really fully featured, but for me personally, the Nova really shines out on the high end here because with onboard audio, I don't need that ESS Saber DAC. I listen on mid-range cans and I have a really good experience on even like a Pro RS for onboard audio. Headphones don't interest me as much as other people perhaps, but I usually listen on open speakers, for example, but the feature set with the Nova is also really impressive in the sense they give you an add-in M.2 card, so you can get an extra 4 slots of NVMe storage, M.2, if you plug that into a PCIe slot, on top of the already incredible amount of M.2 NVMe's on this board. I think in total you can have up to 10 M.2 NVMe drives connected to this board with that add-in board as well. So with 4 terabyte M.2s coming down in price, this could make a pretty wicked M.2 like NAS if you wanted it to. You just probably slot in like a really like low power consumption T CPU, but this board definitely could accommodate someone looking to add in just a huge amount of M.2s off a single board and single functionality. Anyway, guys, closing up today's video, hope you guys enjoyed it. The Z890 motherboards, the designs here, they all look phenomenal. Again, the two value picks that I put up here, the Pro RS as well as the Nova, for me personally, they also look amazing as well. They were my two favorite picks for aesthetics too. But I will say one thing, all these boards, they just look absolutely phenomenal in terms of it comes down to personal preference. And some of them even have the quick release PCIe function, which I do like as a test bed setup, because getting a graphics card out of a PC sometimes can be the biggest pain if the graphics card's really big and you're trying to pull it out and you just can't get to that little latch because it's just like stuck behind a back plate. That can be really annoying. So the fact that there are a lot of the higher end boards here, like the Taichi, the Nova, and the Aorus Master have those quick release functions, as well as the Aorus Elite 7 has it too. It's actually a really cool feature. I do like that. I think that should actually be a feature on high-end motherboards. And honestly, it'd be something I'd be willing to pay an extra $1 or $2 for, because it does come really in handy, especially when you want to upgrade a system too, if you just want to upgrade a GPU in the future. But when it all boils down to it, guys, unfortunately, these motherboards won't see much, I guess, showtime out there in the wild, because the Core Ultra series has been actually so far the sales are abysmally bad. From what I'm seeing and what I'm speaking to with retailers, people are just buying Ryzen CPUs up more than they've ever been buying Ryzen CPUs up. And so, yeah, these motherboards, it's kind of sad to see the amount of effort that got put into them from the board partners and how good they ended up turning out in today's review of them. But then the Core Ultra 9, the revisit, ended up turning out to be pretty bad in the end. Anyhow, hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button. Also, if you have any questions or comments about Z890 or Core Ultra 9 285K, then be sure to hit us up down in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Also, I'm recording on a dynamic here because I went to start recording this video originally standing up and had all the boards on the table and everything, but for some reason, as soon as I hit record, lawnmowers that they're just mowing a big empty block. They don't come, I think they come once a year. They decided to come right as I hit that record button and then just start whirling up the lawnmower. So they're going to be like half a day because it's a huge block to mow. But yeah, this microphone saved the day. Thought you might enjoy that little story at the end of a Tech Yes video. With that aside, I'll catch you guys in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now.